What's not to love about a fallen space marine who's interred in a massive armoured sarcophagus that will fly through the air on psychic wings to beat the enemies of the Emperor to dust? Time to take a look at the Librarian Dreadnought. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we've been looking at the tactics behind a bunch of the Blood Angels units over the past week or so. Today we've reached the Librarian Dreadnought, one of the most interesting and downright powerful units that's only got better with the new Blood of Baal and chapter-approved changes that have boosted the Blood Angels so much. In this video we'll take a look at his rules, any obvious buffs and synergies that we can put on him, and how I would use one in a game of 40k. So without further ado, let's take a quick look at his datasheet. So the Blood Angels Librarian Dreadnought is an HQ choice for Codex Blood Angels, and he has a stat line slightly boosted from the standard Dreadnought. He'll cost you 142 points when he is equipped with a Stormbolter, and he is also armed with a Furioso Force Halberd and a Furioso Fist. He has a movement of 6, so the same as the normal Dreadnought, not as fast as the Furiosos. Weapon skill of 2 up, so very good in close combat. Ballistic skill 3 up, strength 6, toughness 7, 8 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 9 and a 3 up save. His 3 attacks are interesting to note, as most of our dreadnoughts, including the standard one, have 4, but he does rather make up for it by having a 2+ weapon skill. That Furioso Fist is strength times 2, AP minus 3 and damage 3, so a nasty threat to vehicles, particularly when you're hitting on 2s. The Furioso Force Halberd is also flat damage 3, but it's strength plus 4, AP minus 4 and flat damage 3 again. This means that on the first round of combat, when Red Thirst is active, it's typically going to be better to use the Furioso Force Halberd, as you'll be wounding anything bar toughness 10 targets on 2s anyway, and of course the extra pip of AP can sometimes be useful. There are only very specific targets that the Furioso Fist will ever do better than the Force Halberd with, such as toughness 10 vehicles or buildings, or toughness 6 units when you haven't charged. So when in doubt, just attack with the Halberd. He has the option of trading out that Stormbolter for either a Melter Gun or a Heavy Flamer. There's nothing particularly wrong with this, particularly as this guy has good movement with Wings of Sanguinius, and he might well be getting close, but I would personally take the Stormbolter on him, just because it's so cheap and gives you some decent firepower just for 2 points. His other options are his Psychic Powers. He knows Smite and 2 Psychic Powers from the Sanguinary discipline. He can cast 2 a turn and can deny 1 a turn. When he denies a power, he has his Psychic Hood, which will add an extra +1 to his Deny the Witch tests, provided the enemy is within 12-inch range. His other special rules are that he explodes when he's reduced to 0 wounds if you roll a 6, and it's a small 3-inch explosion for D3 mortal wounds each, and he has some smoke launchers, which you can activate in place of shooting 1 turn to get -1 to hit in the next shooting phase. These are certainly worth considering if you're expecting him to be targeted by ranged weapons in the next turn. Anything that you can do to keep him alive, or to soak up more enemy firepower before he dies, is a good thing. One of the most important aspects of his datasheet is that he is a character and he is less than 10 wounds. This means that he won't be targeted unless you shoot him with sniper weapons, so he could be incredibly obnoxious to remove for your opponent, as he's both very tough and has that character protection. So let's talk about the ways to make him stronger then. First of all, we'll talk about his choice of Psychic Powers. He's basically going to be wanting to use very similar powers to Mephiston, who we've recently talked about in his own video. They're both decently tough, very fighty close combat beatsticks that are quite slow unless they gain Wings of Sanguinius, which is probably the best power to use on them. It's got a warp charge of 5. If it's manifested, then you can immediately move as if it were a movement phase. Your movement distance is increased to 12 inches, and he gains the fly keyword until the start of his next psychic phase. This is incredibly important because it means that as you've already moved 6 inches in the movement phase, an extra 12 means he's moved 18 inches, can potentially jump over screens, charge enemy flyers, and all around gain a whole load of mobility. He can also re-roll failed charge rolls as well on top of all this, so it really is a very solid power for getting him into close combat reliably. My second favourite power to put on him is probably Quickening. This one has a warp charge of 7, you add 3 to your advance and charge rolls to make that charge even more reliable, and you can make an additional D3 attacks with him in the fight phase until the start of the next psychic phase. This means he's typically going to be punching with 5 attacks and then 6 with Shock Assault, potentially 7 if you're also in the Blood Angels unique doctrine. That's an incredible number of attacks, particularly when they're almost all going to hit and wound the opponent, and they're all flat damage 3 with very good AP. This thing really will mash things up in close combat. If you do charge him when he's in the Blood Angel's Assault Doctrine and he gets quickening off, he will do an average of around 15 damage to a knight, which will only get better if he has any reroll auras near him. So they would be my top 2 picks for powers. Other ones I'd consider would be Unleash Rage, which will give an extra attack which you could potentially throw on a nearby unit of Death Company or Sanguinary Guard or something. Shield of Sanguinius to give an extra 5-up invul save to a similar unit, or potentially even to himself. And I'm not quite as much a fan of Blood Boil or Blood Lance. In general, I'd rather use Smite or any of the other powers. In terms of character support, you can of course buff this guy up with any number of different characters that boost the melee proficiency of the Blood Angels. There are a lot of different options. To be honest, he doesn't get the best value out of most of them, as he's usually going to be wanting to operate as a lone cannon. But of course you can get him rerolls from captains and lieutenants, extra attacks from the Sanguinor, more reliable charges from the Icon of the Angel, presuming you're not using quickening, and potentially even further boosted charges from a chaplain, again presuming you're not using quickening, which would supersede that. Also, Tech Marines can also repair him, though they may struggle to keep up with him because he has the potential to be just so fast. In terms of relics, he has the Biomantic Sarcophagus, which is one of the Blood of Baal relics that's unique to this model. You can reroll 1 dice when casting psychic powers or denying each turn, and you also add 6 inches to the range of the powers in the Sanguinary discipline. The latter part is useless on Wings of Sanguinius or Quickening, unfortunately, but it could potentially help out the other powers. The first part could easily help you cast the important powers a little bit more reliably. You really don't want to be failing Wings of Sanguinius at a key moment, so that's all good. Bear in mind that you could just use command rerolls for this, however, if you have some spare, and if he passes the cast anyway, you don't even necessarily need to use this. For me, it's not such a bad relic, but there is some quite stiff competition for good relics in the Blood Angels Codex and Blood of Baal, and the Blood Angels are limited to 3 relics in a pure army list, and that's if they pay 3 command points for the privilege. I'd possibly think about this if it was only going to cost me 1 extra command point. I probably wouldn't if I was paying 2 extra command points and it was my 3rd relic. In terms of stratagems, probably the best one he has access to is now Duty Eternal from the Blood of Baal book. This is the one that lets Dreadnoughts half damage of attacks that attack them, which will make him a lot more tricky to remove from the table, which is very good, particularly as you'll often be sending him up as a lone cannon to destroy something nasty. Really solid stratagem for 1 command point. I'd often use this in a game. Otherwise, we've got Wisdom of the Ancients to let him function as a character, which can be used to give himself reroll 1s in combat if he needs it. Red Rampage, another very solid stratagem to give him an extra D3 attacks, so that could boost him up to an average of 9, presuming he's got quickening and as the other buffs go off. Armour of Contempt to maybe shrug some mortal wounds if you're going to be taking a bunch. Honour the Chapter to fight again, with that massive amount of attacks and huge damage output, and only in death does duty end, which could let him try and drag down whatever kills him in the fight phase. From Blood of Baal we have a couple of other useful ones. Firstly, Hero of the Chapter could be used to give him a Warlord trait. You could throw Artisan of War on him to give him 4 damage with those attacks, and Unbridled Ardour could be used to give him a surprise 6-inch heroic intervention and cause an entire combat that might not have happened otherwise. So how would I use this guy in game? Firstly, I wouldn't take too many of these guys, as I think you get diminishing returns the more you take. Basically, they all really want to be using Wings of Sanguinius and Quickening. As Psychic Focus only lets you cast 1 of these each turn, they'll all be fighting over the same powers, and unless one gets killed early, you're going to have one Dreadnought zooming all over the board, and the other one stomping along quite slowly. It's not necessarily the end of the world. You could send one off turn 1 and then at 1 turn 2 with the wing's speed, but it does make it a little bit suboptimal. Mephiston also competes for these powers as well, so if I was including him I'd probably only take 1 Librarian Dreadnought as well. At the start of the game we'd want to keep him well screened, potentially out of line of sight if there are really strong sniper weapons about, but in general he should be able to tank a decent amount of firepower. I would use him to exploit chinks in the enemy's line, with that enormous 18-inch move that you can get with wings, and boosted charge from Quickening. He's easily going to be able to engage anything up to 27 or 28 inches away. I would probably wait until you have a really good charge. It might well be just advancing him behind your screen for a turn, and then going into rage mode second turn when he can get a really good target. When he connects, I'd certainly consider using Red Rampage, as 9 of those attacks that should have a really good job of wiping out virtually any target in the game, provided they don't have too high an invul save. It might well be worth declaring a charge on 2 big targets at once, piling into the first, killing it, consolidating towards the enemy, and then activating Honour the Chapter to fight again, and hopefully crush that second enemy as well. You could remove multiple tanks or Eldar flyers in one turn like this, provided the dice weren't too harsh on you, and he could easily earn his points back very quickly. Before you've done all this, I would strongly consider activating smoke launchers, as if you throw a Librarian Dreadnought into the enemy's lines, they're going to shoot it with most things. Then you can also activate Duty Eternal, if he's going to be targeted by a lot of multi-damage weapons, so with a -1 to hit and halving damage, he should take a lot more firepower than the enemy really wants to spare to kill him, while hopefully the rest of your army and strategy goes untouched, and then can come in for another hammer blow next turn. I wouldn't say that this is the only way to use him. You could try and use him a bit more conservatively and play around with some tough units nearby him to screen for him, so hopefully he can pounce on an enemy unit and then be shielded from direct firepower from the rest of the enemy army. I don't think this will be quite as easy to do in every game, because he is going to be wanting to make long charges to try and just engage some key targets, and if you don't go for those, he might well not wind up making quite as big a dent as he could. But it's certainly an option that's there. Maybe running him alongside an impulsor with a shield dome that can advance alongside him, and perhaps charge an enemy unit to tank Overwatch for him, and then if you aim to finish him behind the impulsor, people will really struggle to shoot him. You could probably achieve the similar effect with things like scouts well positioned out of line of sight, or maybe an advancing intercessor battle line or something. There are a lot of shenanigans that you can pull with the character keyword. Overall, I think he's a really solid choice for a Blood Angels HQ choice. It's not often that you can get a Dreadnought for so cheap in an HQ slot, so if you just want some raw might, he might well be worth considering for your army. His closest equivalent in the Codex is probably Mephiston, who, like we mentioned before, does a lot of the same things. This guy generally will have a slightly higher damage output against hard targets, has greater toughness, has smoke launchers, and has the option of the Artisan of War trait or the Biomantic Sarcophagus. Mephiston has the infantry keyword, so he can hide in ruins a lot more easily, or hide out of line of sight. He has a 2-up armor save, his very nice 5-up Feel No Pain type save, and is probably just as strong against infantry, but maybe a little bit less so against vehicles because his weapon is a damage D3 weapon rather than flat damage 3. They're about the same points cost, so I can really see the positives and negatives of each. Personally, in a flat-out competitive Blood Angels list, I prefer these guys to Mephiston, just because of the amount of raw toughness and might they can get, and particularly now they have Duty Eternal as an option to them, to really reduce incoming firepower. That is personal preference though, I do think both are good. Let me know if you've had any success with these guys down in the comments below. From personal experience, mainly fighting against them, I've noticed that they can really achieve very surprising things, and get to places that you really wouldn't expect a Dreadnought to be able to get to, and really put the smack down on your hard targets. I'm sure that a lot of people will have some interesting stories to tell about what they've accomplished. I'll be continuing with my Blood Angels review over the next few weeks. We've still got a lot of interesting unique units to cover, so if you'd be interested in seeing more, please subscribe to Auspex Tactics, and feel free to support me on Patreon if these videos are useful to you. It really helps the channel out, and helps to get me towards more of a position where I can focus on this, outside of just my spare time. Again, thanks for listening. I'll look to see you guys next time.